By the spring of 1565, the balance of power in the Mediterranean was about to be tested like never before. On one side stood the Ottoman Empire, led by the aging but still formidable Sulian the Magnificent, ruler of an empire that stretched across 3 continents. On the other, a small island fortress, Malta, held by the Knights Hospitaller, a defiant brotherhood of warriors who had spent decades harassing Ottoman trade and pride. Sulian's patience had finally run out. He would send his most trusted commanders, Mustafa Pasha, Admiral Pale Pasha, and the legendary corsair Ture, to crush the Knights once and for all. What followed would become one of the most desperate and heroic sieges in history, a clash that would decide the fate of the Mediterranean itself. Sulian the Magnificent at 71 was a living legend, but he was also tired of these pesky Knights of St. John, these Christian corsairs constantly raiding his vital shipping lanes. For years, Malta had been their perfect base, a dagger aimed squarely at the throat of the Mediterranean. It was a strategic choke point, a hub for their privateering operations that had become a constant, infuriating thorn in the Sultan's side. Take Malta, and the road to Sicily would be wide open. Take Sicily, and the heart of Christian Europe, already fractured, would unravel like a cheap, forgotten rug. The Knights themselves had a history of defiance. Exiled from their previous stronghold on Rhodes in late 1522 and departing in early 1523 by Suleiman himself, they had been granted Malta by Emperor Charles V on one crucial condition. They had to police the sea lanes to be the shield against Ottoman expansion. For Sulian, wiping them off the map wasn't just a strategic imperative. It was deeply personal. Every Christian galley they captured, every Muslim pilgrim ship they harassed was an insult to the Sultan's immense prestige, a direct challenge to his divine mandate. This wasn't just about territory. It was about honor. So, he assembled a force of truly biblical proportions, the largest amphibious invasion seen since antiquity. We're talking 130 sleek war galleys, 180 transport ships laden with men and material, and around 25,000 to 30,000 crack troops. And that's not counting the camp followers, the engineers, the artillery specialists, and one very angry, very cunning corsair admiral named Dragut, whose legendary reputation preceded him. This was the might of the Ottoman Empire. Unleashed against this overwhelming tide, Grandmaster Jean de Valette, a seasoned warrior in his late 60s, scraped together what he could. His corps were 500 knights, the elite fighting force of the order. Then there were around 4,500 European mercenaries, mostly Spanish and Italian, and about 3,000 Maltese militia, farmers and townsfolk, many with little to no military training. But with everything to lose, they had enough gunpowder for maybe 6 weeks if they were careful. The odds roughly 10 to 1. And let's be honest, the Ottomans definitely had the better food. It looked like a foregone conclusion, didn't it? May 18th, the date etched into Maltese history. Ottoman scouts, their small boats gliding silently, paddled into Marsalak Bay. Mustafa Pasha, the Ottoman land commander, was supremely confident. He fully expected the Knights to sue for peace within days, perhaps even hours. He anticipated a swift, decisive victory. Instead, what he found were star-shaped forts, newly reinforced, bristling with artillery, and manned by an enemy who seemed stubbornly unwilling to surrender. This was not the welcome he had envisioned. To keep his ambitious timetable, Mustafa knew he had to secure the deep-water anchorage inside Grand Harbor. That meant taking Fort St. Elmo, a tiny, almost insignificant outpost perched precariously on the tip of the Skies Peninsula. It looked like a minor obstacle, a mere inconvenience. But Grandmaster de Valette, with a grim pragmatism, quietly understood St. Elmo was expendable. Every Ottoman hour spent battering its walls was a precious week bought for the rest of the island, for the more critical defenses of Bairu and Sanga. It was a brutal calculation, but a necessary one. For nearly 30 agonizing days, the Turks hammered the fort relentlessly. They unleashed a torrent of 80-pound cannonballs, turning stone into dust, earth into craters. The knights trapped within St. and Elmo's crumbling walls replied with desperate ingenuity. By night, they'd launched daring raids, rolling burning hoops of tar down the slopes, setting the Ottoman siege towers ablaze, lighting up the night with a hellish glow. Casualties mounted on both sides, a bloody tally that seemed to grow exponentially with each passing hour. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder, smoke, and death. Then came a devastating blow for the Ottomans. Dragut, the legendary 80-year-old Corsair king, a brilliant strategist and a fearsome warrior, was mortally wounded by a stone shard during a reconnaissance mission in late June. His death around June 23rd was a crushing psychological blow, sapping the morale of the besiegers. Yet despite this, the fort finally collapsed on June 23rd. The Ottomans had gained a ruin, a mere patch of shattered rock no wider than 4 football fields, but at a horrifying cost. About 2,000 to 4,000 of their men lay dead, sacrificed for a strategic point that had bought the defenders invaluable time. Mustafa, enraged by the unexpected resistance and the heavy losses, ordered the knights' bodies beheaded. Their corpses gruesomely floated across the harbor on planks. A chilling message. Valette's response was swift, brutal, and equally chilling. He ordered the heads of his Ottoman prisoners fired back from the walls of Bayreuth. The siege had become personal. It was no longer just about territory. It was a blood feud, a test of wills. July boiled in, bringing with it not just the scorching Mediterranean heat, but a suffocating sense of desperation. Food, water, and hope, once precious commodities, now ran perilously low within the beleaguered walls of Burgu and Sanga. The Ottomans, learning from their costly victory at St. Elmo, pressed their assault with renewed ferocity and a grim determination. Ottoman miners, skilled and relentless, began tunneling beneath the bastions, attempting to breach the defenses from below. But the Maltese were just as resourceful. Women, children, and old men joined the defense, hauling clay pots filled with olive oil, then pouring the viscous liquid into the mows. When the attackers inevitably waded through, the oil was torched, transforming the mows into rivers of fire. A truly horrifying spectacle that repelled many in assault. Every single night, under a sky lit by the flickering flares of war, both sides counted their dead. The silence punctuated only by the groans of the wounded and the distant cries of the enemy. On August 15th, the Feast of the Assumption, a day usually reserved for solemn celebration, Mustafa launched a massive coordinated assault, hitting both Burgu and Sanga simultaneously. Scaling ladders, dozens of them, reached the ramparts. And for 3 brutal, bloody hours, the battle was a chaotic hand-to-hand melee. Valette, now 70 years old, a figure of incredible resolve, was seen fighting in full armor at the breach, a sword clutched in one hand, a crucifix in the other. A knight witnessing the Grand Master's fierce presence. Later recorded, our Lord was seen that day in the shape of an angry Grand Master. His presence, his sheer refusal to yield, rallied the exhausted defenders. Miraculously, the Ottomans withdrew, leaving another 3,000 dead outside the walls. But the siege was taking its toll in other ways. Their tents, once a symbol of their overwhelming numbers, now crowded every valley, becoming breeding grounds for disease. Dysentery and heat stroke began to finish what cannonballs could not. Yet, the defenders were also at their breaking point. They were down to their last barrels of water, their last loaf of bread, which was now being split 9 ways. The whispers of despair grew louder. In Sicily, the Spanish viceroy, Don Garcia de Toledo, heard the grim reports and believed the island was finished, a lost cause. But against all odds, against the advice of many, he assembled a relief force anyway. 8,000 men loaded on a 35 galleys. And then he waited for the right wind, a divine intervention, anything that might give them a chance. Then on September 7th, a glimmer of hope, a whisper on the wind, a small fleet, almost impossibly small, slipped into Amelia Bay at dawn. It was the relief force, the famed Grand Saxo, about 8,000 men strong. But it carried something far more potent than its numbers, the red and yellow flag of Spain. Ottoman scouts, seeing the banner, instantly panicked. Was this it? Was this the spearhead of a Holy League armada? A massive Christian counterattack they hadn't anticipated. Mustafa Pasha, already demoralized, his supplies dwindling to a mere 10 days' worth, made a desperate gamble. He ordered one last all-out mass assault, hoping to crush the remaining resistance before the full might of Europe, as he imagined it, descended upon him. But it was too late. The spirit of his men was broken. The assault failed within an hour. His elite janissaries, the feared shock troops of the Ottoman Empire, simply refused to climb the ladders again. They had seen too much death, suffered too many defeats at the hands of these stubborn, desperate defenders. On September 11th, the unthinkable happened. The Turks, defeated and utterly demoralized, burned their tents, spiked their remaining cannon so they couldn't be used by the enemy, and sailed away. Europe, which had been holding its breath for 4 agonizing months, finally exhaled. The relief was palpable, a collective sigh of disbelief and triumph that echoed from Madrid to Warsaw. The cost was immense. Ottoman losses were staggering. At least 10,000 dead, perhaps even more, a horrifying butcher bill. Maltese losses were equally tragic. A third of the island's population had perished, along with 250 of the knights, the very core of their defense. Yet, the psychological earthquake caused by this victory was far bigger than any raw casualty count. For the first time since the fall of Constantinople, the supposedly unstoppable Ottoman superpower had been stopped not by a grand army, but by a rock, a few zealots, and an almost superhuman refusal to bend. It shattered the myth of their invincibility and profoundly shifted the geopolitical landscape of the Mediterranean. Valette, with his characteristic what would later famously quip, "Nothing is better known than the siege of Malta." And he was absolutely right. The victory immediately captured the imagination of Europe. Prince of the Siege flew off the presses in Antwerp. Poets penned epic verses comparing the indomitable Valette to the legendary Leonidas of Sparta. The knights, flushed with new prestige and renewed purpose, began rebuilding their capital, christening it Valette, a magnificent, meticulously planned city that still stands today as Europe's first planned city north of the Alps. It was a monument to their defiance, a permanent symbol of victory. More importantly, the Ottoman tide never again seriously threatened Italy or the heart of Western Europe. The empire, stung by this humiliating defeat, began to pivot. Its ambitions turned east toward Persia and south toward North Africa, and it became embroiled in the endless grinding wars for control of Hungary. The psychological blow in Malta had forced a strategic reevaluation, changing the course of their expansion. In Malta itself, the victory became the island's founding myth, a defining moment in its national identity. Every parish on the island still celebrates its local heroes from a siege. And every Maltese child learns the incredible price of freedom measured in the very limestone of their island and the blood of their ancestors. The knights who had been on the verge of bankruptcy before 1565 suddenly found donations pouring in from every corner of Christian Europe from Madrid to Kiev. Their revitalized navy would continue to harry Berber pirates and Ottoman shipping for another 2 centuries, a testament to their renewed power. And Sulian, the magnificent sultan, whose grand ambitions had been so thoroughly thwarted, died the very next year on another muddy Hungarian battlefield, reportedly muttering, "Malta, Malta," as legend has it, a testament to how deeply the defeat had wounded him. So the next time you think that numbers tell the whole story, or that she might always triumphs, remember this. 500 knights, 3,000 brave farmers, and a 70-year-old commander who simply would not hand over the keys to Europe. They didn't just win a battle. They turned a tiny map that into a continent's shield. They proved definitively that sometimes, just sometimes, a potent cocktail of grit, strategic geography, and a dash of holy stubbornness can stop even the most overwhelming force history can throw at you. History is, of course, full of turning point battles, colossal clashes featuring legions of men, and vast artillery parks. But Malta 1565 is that rare one, the truly exceptional one, decided not by overwhelming numbers, but by sheer willpower clad in chain mail and fueled by an unshakable belief.